Joining us now, Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts. He serves on the Armed Services Committee and is a combat veteran who served 4 tours with the U.S. Marines. Congressman, really great to see you. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Good to see you, Jonathan.
Let's start simply with this. Some of your colleagues in Congress raised objections that the administration carried out these strikes without congressional approval. Do you share that concern, or do you feel like these strikes were appropriately ordered?
No, the strikes were unquestionably ordered appropriately by the president. Look, I think that Congress has an important role in deciding whether to go to war. That's very clear, and I've taken that position many times in the past. But what the president has done is clearly defined under law when the president is allowed to respond unilaterally to threats against the United States, and then there is a very strict congressional notification requirement. He has 48 hours to notify Congress. He has 60 days to make sure the strikes are stopped before he comes back to Congress for additional permission. He's following all that to the letter of the law. So he's doing the right thing. He's protecting U.S. interests, and he's following the U.S. Constitution.
So let's talk about the impact, then, of these strikes. Do you believe that they were warranted? But more than that, do you think that they will work? Do you think this will deter Houthis from attacking further ships in the Red Sea? And also, as a second part to that, what is your concern now that this could actually lead to a wider conflict in the region?
Well, Jonathan, I think you've picked an important word there, which is deter. That's exactly what the president is trying to do. He's trying to deter further attacks. Let's be clear. These are terrorist attacks against defenseless civilian ships, defenseless international crews. And what the president is doing is saying we will not stand for terrorism, and we are going to deter further attacks. And I would argue deter escalation of this conflict by responding. So a lot of critics have said this is escalation. I think it's deterrence. A lot of critics have said the president's not following the Constitution. Actually, he's following it to the letter of the law. And a lot of critics have said this could result in a wider regional war. The president is keenly aware of that. He's keenly aware of that. And he's taking strikes against the Houthis in Yemen, against the militant groups in Iraq, to deter an escalation of conflict that, let's be clear, has been started by these militant groups.
So, Congressman, as you sit on the Armed Services Committee, I also wanted to ask you around the controversy surrounding Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. The Office of the Inspector General at the Pentagon announced that it will conduct a review of Secretary Austin's hospitalization, saying yesterday in a memo that the review's purpose is to examine the details behind the Secretary's time in the hospital, he's still there, and how transparent the Department of Defense was about his stay, and about how the Defense Secretary and the Department itself failed to notify U.S. officials and the White House until several days after Austin was admitted. We should note the top 2 members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Democrat Jack Reed of Rhode Island and Republican Robert Wicker of Mississippi, sent a letter to Austin asking for a briefing following the review. So what do you think, Congressman? Did the Secretary handle this appropriately, and do you think there should be any repercussions that he would need to face?
He did not handle this appropriately. It's totally unacceptable. You can't have the highest levels of our military chain of command unaware that a senior official is indisposed. And look, I served as a United States Marine lieutenant, a platoon commander at the lowest level of the officer chain of command, and I cannot imagine this happening at that level. I mean, all of us who just work in jobs where we have a reporting chain, we know that if we don't show up, we've got to let our boss know. I mean, that's just common sense. So we all care about Secretary Austin and his family. I mean, my grandfather died of prostate cancer. We all are concerned about his health. But he has a responsibility inherent in his job, a national security responsibility to the United States to report to the president, and he failed to do that. That has to have consequences.
And Congressman, let's also ask you about the situation in Israel. It's been nearly 100 days since more than 240 people were taken captive from Israel. More than 100 hostages still remain. There's yet to be any sort of deal to get them out. What is your sense right now about the ongoing state of negotiations? There's still some discussions happening there. I know there's been some concern about whether the amount of aid reaching Gaza is enough. The administration certainly urged Israel to be more targeted in its strikes. From what you're hearing from the Netanyahu government, what do you think of their vision, not just for this next phase of the war, but what comes after for Gaza?
Well, I said at the very beginning of this conflict that Prime Minister Netanyahu needs an end game. And an end game means a political resolution to this conflict, a political future that can be understood and envisioned by Israelis, by the troops who are literally risking their lives on the ground fighting the Hamas terrorists, and by the people of Gaza who have to buy into a peaceful political future, or else this will just be an endless war for Israel. So it's easy to forget that as this war has escalated after the heinous, barbaric attacks of October 7th, that there are still over 100 hostages in captivity, that there's no end in sight to the conflict, and that at the end of the day, we can't be back where we started. We've got to have a political resolution to this that gives a future to the Palestinian people and security to both the Palestinians and the Israelis.
And Congressman, very briefly lastly, I just want to circle back to the Defense Secretary. You said repercussions would be warranted. Do you think he should keep his job?
Look, that's a decision for the Commander-in-Chief, but the Commander-in-Chief of the United States needs to send a clear and decisive message that this will never happen again.
All right. Well, we appreciate your time this morning, covering a lot of ground with us. Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts, thank you. Certainly we will speak again soon. You the same.